I recently had the misfortune of watching a presentation about one of the speeches given by Theodore Roosevelt, and it was made by essentially some type of cultural operative. Again, infomercialists are really slick these days. In fact, they've been slick for a while. If I go back to their equivalents in the 1960s, they were slick. They were pretty slick. Cosmopolitan, up on the issues, knew everything more than everyone else in a world that didn't have the internet, and they could pass off their leftism as some type of modern thing and not a gimmick, and have people sort of give them the benefit of the doubt. But today, yeah, they're out there. And so don't forget, the left, they're engaged, they love memory wars. Memory war is a big thing. Like, let's not forget when they kicked off the 2022, February 2022 invasion into Western Europe. It was based on a memory war first. Like, well, see, you took this away from us that belonged to us, but it didn't belong to them, type thing. But if you dispute their memory war, then you're the enemy, right? You're a bourgeois theoretician, a reactionary. They have all these boxes just waiting for you, just waiting to be activated. They just need to repackage it. It's just plug and play. If you're in country X, they're doing the same thing in country Y using different people, different language, same shtick. And so their main thing is, now of course, let's not forget there's a split, right? There's a split between the East. There's the despotic core in the East that's has more of a military focus. But outside of that, it's the exterminationist faction. Basically people that will take political office under false pretenses and engage in criminal or illicit activities, and also rewrite the culture to fit their narrative. This was a bad country until our people, our values prevailed over the original people that were there that we decide are bad in our memory war. So we're going to activate animosity today against people that we say in the past were bad. When in fact it was the other way around. The people who founded the country were the good people. I think we can also say that about South Africa too. We can say that. Go back in Wikipedia. When did it become a bad country? Well, when the leftists said it did. And if they go away, then guess what the new story is going to be? It's going to be the new old story that actually the people who founded the country were the good people that did the good things. And the people that put that all into question, threw that into a strange light, those were the bad people that claimed that they were the good people. Because that's sort of what malignant narcissists do. Sadists will do that. Pick something they know isn't true and make it the truth, and then beat up on people that don't go along with the sadistic game in a conformist fashion because they're into ideological conformity too. Oh yeah, Chinese revolution with Western characteristics updated for this very hour with their very operatives, with better funding and better access than they had during the Cold War. Could that be what we're dealing with? Oh my goodness. So simple. So easy to understand now. People in the culture trying to mess it up. Excluding the real thing. Appropriationist, substitutionist, inversionist, exterminationist. That's how it is. It's not a culture the left feels it wants to preserve. It's the bad thing, they said. They have many years invested in that narrative. Many years invested in the gaslighting and propaganda, domestically and internationally. So if their fifth column wins elections and then they say the same thing that their handlers say, that's the consistency you're looking at. You're not looking at a historical reality. You're looking at a political reality, a convenient one, cooked up and perpetrated by the same people that have created the biggest bunch of historical vandalism any other group has ever perpetrated anywhere, ever. So that's what you're dealing with. So he tried, again, he digged up Theodore Roosevelt, found one speech, and then tried to put all of the leftists, inject all the leftist ideology and interpretation on top. You know what? Yeah, he was the last president, but he believed in the same BS that the so-called current political regime believed in, which is a total inversion. Whatever he said about this or that in 1904, the context was totally different, believe you me. To claim that he meant what he meant, according to some leftists, is not presenting themselves as that, like they're presenting themselves as some historical expert. Yeah, don't believe it. Don't believe the hype. They are just consistently ideologically wrong on history. So if you see any of their favorite talking points, and remember, each country has its different talking points, because they have cultural experts that will study the issues and that try to mess it up or antagonize groups against each other. But back in the day, they didn't have that antagonism because there weren't people pushing that antagonistic angle or narrative, because they weren't crazy like that. They weren't organized like that. They weren't committed to injecting that toxicity into the discussion, the public discussion. But now it's standard operating procedure. Rewrite the past according to their psychosociological tropes. This is a good leader because he believed our crap, so this is actually an extension of the real American tradition. No, it's not. How about we take the other more plausible theory that a bunch of bad people have reinterpreted our past and are now implementing some of the worst socioeconomic and political policies that they could possibly come up with, because that's what their handlers had them sign off on. But if you believe that really the best rises to the top at this point in our illiberal democratic journey, then I don't know what I can do for you. But I do know that polls approval ratings are consistently below 20% and have been for decades. So maybe they'll start falsifying that data as we go forward, as they do in other illiberal democracies. I would be very surprised if they tolerated a mirror to their very unpopular socioeconomic and political positions, which are power plays, sadistic power plays, tyrannical, sadistic social policies. Don't conform to the narrative, you're bourgeois. Or the term they come up with, some even in a more hateful term. See, bourgeois sounds too neutral. They come up, you're just a hater now. They've stupefied their hate terms. It's not as snide as it was when it was beginning. Now it's just you're just filled with all the things they're filled with, because this is the thing that drives them into a rage, is being confronted with an alternative narrative when they want to bully smart people into conforming to their politically convenient fairy tale. They really, on the face of it, any thinking person that isn't a conformist or would revolt on the face of it, just by the smell of it. But when you got a lot of smuggy wokies and conformists, essentially, people that are naturally predisposed to conform and might have also some narcissistic personality traits by nature, naturally more narcissistic, can't be wrong type of, well, I was taught this in school, so I got 95%, like I got A pluses throughout my school education run by ideologues, and so yeah, obviously you're a hater for presenting the truth to me. And yeah, let's go after them. Let's get them fired from the history department. They're inciting us to fly ourselves into a rage because it doesn't. The smart guy doesn't agree with what we say. Oh, there's so much comedy there. So much comedy. Let's just look at the comedy. Just think of how that comedy writes itself. I could do a book right now. I could do an entire book based on that premise. And in each individual scene, each individual way, the professor is confronted with the mob of ignoramuses. People could laugh. It will be funny. Like, I'll exaggerate their bad features and make it a little bit more comedy. In real life, it's grimmer when you have universities filled with high functioning, disabled people, morally disabled people. It's a little bit grim. I can speak from personal experience. But I'm sure it's going to get more grim as things get further and further away from the truth. Because the tyrannical sadistic personality type, it's power. It's all about power, punishment, revenge for things people aren't responsible for, satisfying the most vulgar desires that human beings can possibly have. And a bunch of cowards and fools letting them do it, propping them up. So these are all like nightmare cultural landscapes that the 40s and 50s and 30s and 20s knew in different places. But now the West gets to know the grimness. Like, forget the GDP, the doomerism index shoots up another 100 points. You can start a doomerism index. And then you can also, on the side of that, just to note, okay, the higher the doomerism index go, here these key things plummet, like public satisfaction, right? Optimism, freedom, everything else. Teach that in their economics class, why don't you? That would also be the quickest way to get canceled. They don't like people breaking things down. Like, if you do this, you turn the court system into a circus. You're actually really cutting off the legs the entire society is based on. You could tell them that, but they don't believe you, and they also don't care. They got a lot of issues they're dealing with, and they like taking it out on people that don't deserve it, but they think they do. And they have that thinking they do has that rationality department to it. They're just in those loops, rational loops, rationalizing loops. Why does the sadist do the sadistic thing? Well, they have their reasons. They're always thinking of reasons. They're really smart finding reasons, historical reasons that aren't really consistent. And even if they were, my great-great-granddaddy was punched in the face on some day, somebody said, so now I'm going to punch you. The wrongness of that just eludes a sadist. It's not really that story. If they had to invent that story, they would. because really it was all about just punching you in the face. They just figured out a special way of doing it because they're a special kind of personality cluster. The four major misdirections: greed, schemerism, psychopathy, and sadism. There you go. That'd be funny, like in future systems, political systems, anybody scores high in those four traits, you could disqualify them for political office. But, I mean, it's really a question of how you would do that in a reliable, fair way. But, yeah, just like kudzu, you let those four wrong directions boost them, they'll take over your potato patch real quick. You will have no potatoes, or just very few atrophied ones. A lot of kudzu that produces nothing essentially, except some ground cover, and that's it. Doesn't no where be the vegetables? Can kudzu be eaten? How does kudzu taste? Like, has anyone had kudzu soup? No potatoes, no onions, no carrots, no leeks, just potatoes that have grown with a thick kudzu canopy over them, and the kudzu itself in a 95-5 despotic, illiberal democracy. With the insiders, right? Don't forget the eggheads. They need people to falsify data and shill for them. They got positions open for people like that, but they do put them to the test. It's every day, lying every day, essentially. So if they got A pluses in school, they might make the cut, but we sort of know what those demographics look like in the education system or in the economy, where they mandate via lawfare these horrifying demographic mandates, fixing the outcome, not the capacity, or fixing outcome, not ability. See, that could go in that book as well. There could be a political movement where they have that on their banner. And then just the complete fools that congregate around misguided things like that. Henpecking each other. Who's more on board with with that? And then you could have someone like the lowliest, what they perceive to be the lowliest member of society, just pop out of nowhere and talk like me. Put them to complete shame, and then they, close ranks and ostracize the smart person. Oh, it's diabolical. It's certainly diabolical. But it's really so stupid that there's a lot to work with. It's just, there would be so much better things to write about, wouldn't there? So you really do have to watch if you're connecting these aversionary bridges that aren't necessary. Like those HSPs out there, don't do this. Don't do this. Because it is, in a way, if you don't do it right, it can be awfulizing. Like, I'll be the first to admit that I am somewhat still engaged with these things, which is why I'm working through it in this type of way. Trying to extract myself in this way, but it's not really the most skillful practice, is it? Because all that time I just spent, I'm not getting that back. But on the other hand, there's a certain cowardice in not looking the thing right in the eye and describing it as it is. I think that can be cowardly for someone who's been so fortunate in the information age to have experienced so much true information despite their attempts to strangle it out. that I do have a duty to the truth. Which is a duty that let me tell you, the rewards for it are way worse than you think. Like how there's public derision, an immense amount of hate from deranged people, essentially. Poverty. What else? Fight or flight, like for your entire lives until it develops some type of dissociative trauma of condition. I mean, there's all types of bad things that happen when you're living in a psychosociological war zone. Like, why don't I feel at home? Like anywhere in the world. Like, why is that? Well, there's just these hateful conditions all over the place, by design. And then you think, all right, well, if we get into the worst type of banker mindset, it's just they're rent seeking and they don't want the peasants to revolt. They want them to pay up, and they want them to pay up progressively. Then you can also see there's a Venn diagram between sadists. There's not just the ideological variety, there's the economic variety. And it's so weird because they present this false dichotomy that the one is against the other, but just like we see in Animal Farm, they're actually both on the same side. They have similar values. The one is more greedy and let's say passively, let's say spinelessly sadistic. And the other is more tyrannically sadistic and greedy for power more than material things. So on the personality spectrum, they fit. On the political spectrum, they're presented as oppositional. Which is why both right and left, I like putting that I like to circle it with a bit, and I write over top gas ball. And then everything outside of that gas ball, and essentially the entire free universe, that's where Western civilization should be. So watch them. The sociological, political, scientist type of engineering. Don't accept those frames. People framing things like that, they're old bad news. That's really standard way of seeing them. Talking about left, right, far. See, always invert what they say. They're talking about the far right is a threat. What are they? They're far left. That's it. They're giving it away. They're giving away their whole gimmick. So you have someone signaling like that, that person, there should be a vote. Somebody put it up to a referendum. They should not finish out their office. There should be a public protest. Something happened. Somebody pulled strings. So their side arranged something, and that's the stooge. So one day more in office is really not better for your country, is it? Certainly isn't for civilization. Certainly not for the time, the people that they're set up to engage, which will be a fruitless enterprise, I hate to tell you, but actually it's a good thing if you know it, because you can stop wasting your time. They need to go. You need someone who's authentic, a person of the people. That's the promise of democracy. It's a promise that needs to deliver with a public that is up on the issues and knows what type of games are being played and by who and why. And once you have that, then you know, okay, freedom is in a different place than what they're offering. Let's also not forget when they're terroristic, let's say political terror campaigns were kicking off leading up to C-19 and afterwards, and C-19 can be viewed in that context as well as we move forward and gain a little bit more perspective on these things. They were not just canceling people socially, they canceled them financially, like their whole bank accounts got frozen. So you worked as like a minor and had your savings of like, who knows what, $20,000 or something. you're 47 and you're just trying to keep up with the bills like the other peons and serfs, modern day slaves. Went to the ATM to get some gas money or some grocery money, denied. Had to contact the bank, and you had some type of shell game that went on where the extra legality was couched in counter-terrorist terms, or you name it. You need to pay a lawyer, take out a loan for $100,000 to fight it. Took you some like 6 months or something to get your bank account unlocked, and then you got 100,000 debt you can pay off with that 20,000 savings, and your job if you didn't get fired from that too in the meantime. Of course, any mental suffering that's not really quantifiable, is it? But you had that expectation, you had that assumption that they wouldn't go that far, but you see, you were wrong about your expectations of civility and fairness and the law and its enforcement and the cost of just being alive in systems that pretend to be democracies, but in fact are illiberal ones. But they just let, one or two people spread out know that at a time. That's just the case that came to the public attention. How many cases did? How many people are dead because of that? Well, somebody would have to care enough to bring their case to the court that is stocked with their operatives, and then maybe run that to the Supreme Court, and then probably have it kicked out on technicality, because they like sadistic games like that they can win. That's why they're there. They don't want to lose court cases as illicit operators with direct connections to OC. Let's just call it that. OC coming in, OC going out. OC keeping them in. Which would be funny, like these days, because they operate in complete darkness and without any journalistic oversight, we could just run the numbers and just look at how many cases they decided and start putting trends together, and probably on the basis of that, you could sentence them to life in prison pretty easily based on the facts, not on the ideology. And then just for scientific purposes, you could say this person got, at least officially, $250,000 a year to be a judge, and we estimate that they caused, $3 billion worth of damage. And they were active for 10 years. If I pushed a button and ran the data, you would probably throw out 10,000 names that essentially are that. But they're looking to ride this out till they die. They might just have turned 50 or 60. They want to be there another 30 years, 20 years. They don't retire. Malignant narcissists, they don't retire. Everyone's out to get them. They kick down anybody coming up, anybody a threat to them. They kick down. It's all about them. So I hope this little episode was entertaining, at least. We should always try to entertain ourselves. I'm a big believer in gallows humor. I think if you do take the Buddhist perspective and see this dimensionality, not as a hell, but certainly there's devilish influence in this realm, and the Buddha did not deny that, then again, it is what it is. It's dynamic. Things swinging down, things swinging up. But just as an experiment, I will probably put a link for donations in the description. so that we can see what the power of the people is. My thinking is I won't earn a damn cent, but maybe there's 10 people out there that can spare a cup of coffee. We'll just see. I think that's a great thing too, is just see how public democracies are supposed to function, but when you have people that are essentially serfs and slaves, they don't have any money to support anyone, not even themselves. So why should I consider that an insult? They don't have $400 for gas money. They're not going to send me $5. I get it, okay? But the other part of the experiment is how long will it take for them to cancel that? This new iteration, we'll see. It goes up, you earn something like $500 and they come in and shut it down. That's just for the personal story. That's why I'm doing this. So first, to see how little people have to share. The generosity index, it's at -0 for good things in this time. And then again, the sadistic efficiency factor, how fast can they end up canceling the right thing again? This is going to be 6 months, 3 months, 2 weeks? How did they do it in China? Nobody knows. Not letting people know that info. Officially, they don't do that. At least that's the story they tell to Westerners. They're operatives over. I'm in China. We don't eat dogs. That's just a lie. Of course they eat them. What? It's people they don't know. They were sent to special training school, and that's why they get upset about those cultural tropes they say that are absolutely true. But again, you pull out a camera and record that, they probably, within 5 minutes, they come and bust your camera. That's how they manufacture their truths, don't they? Can't prove it. Where's the fact checker? The fact checker comes in on the side and their side. He's on their side. Just like C-19, let's not forget. Anybody lived through that? Don't forget that. All that scientific mumbo jumbo, and then finally, what did they use it for? Yeah, just a payout for them and people that they could divert that money to that would have been better spent in, for example, national security or industry or anything else. So don't forget the sadistic component. I was missing that for a while. I knew the effect was sadistic. I didn't realize it was coming directly from a personality type that saw that as a desirable outcome. See, I had that blindness, the blindness of nobility. Now, I'm using nobility in a supernormal term. I've since come to realize that it's normal. So sadism is probably in some type of spectrum of normalcy. I mean, if you're not chopping up little animals, which would be extreme, you might be beating up on yourself unnecessarily, which is essentially a sadist propensity, which is really counterintuitive. Why would you do that? Well, people do that. Is it skillful? Nope. Can it be stopped? Yes. Should you stop it? Yes. Can you stop it? Maybe. Some people stop it when they catch it, and then it comes back. Sometimes it is on a subconscious level. They've internalized something that's like that. They've internalized the sadistic idea, and they're not even aware that it's running in the background. It's like a background process. So every time they look at the mirror, they're not good enough. But some of them really aren't even close to good, so don't have too much sympathy for it. If you're a good person and you're doing that, that's wrong. If you're a bad person and you feel like you're a bad person, unlike the malignant narcissist, then actually that's true. You should change your ways. You should use that for insight. say, well, this is insightful. Yeah, actually, this is true. So let me stop doing what I'm doing. Let me let go of a me that was like that and become a new me, or actually not become a new me, just keep becoming a not me, not mine. Which is fine. It's just like an open room. You don't see your face. You don't have to have a self that's telling you that you have to do this or that or see things like this or that because you thought that way before and now don't. Right? That's a process of discovery. That's a process of development. That's a process of letting go. It's a process of embracing good things. Or just not embracing anything, waiting to embrace something, qualifying it before you embrace something, questioning whether you need to embrace something. This person showed up and for no reason anybody knew, slapped me straight across the face. So this is what's happening on Thursday. She tries to do it again, and what happens? You move real quick. And she misses, and then you snap your fingers, she's gone. Now you got a funny story. Another unskillful encounter on this comedic planet. But, next Thursday it might be the opposite. Somebody who thought they hated you is like, totally convinced you're the only one in the world that's perfectly suited for them, and they have to have you. They just want to hold on to you. They feel your presence all around them all the time. They just can't stop thinking about you, how much they love you, how much they adore you, how much they, right? It's also delusional. So don't do that. It's not good. People think that's good because they feel that love, they feel that attraction, they feel that magnetism, they feel that charisma. It has to be right? Well, no, sometimes not. If it's pulling you into the defilements, it's not the right thing. Right? The Buddha has this problem as well. Many revere him as a god, but actually he was a man, he was a teacher. He was telling you that this is how you do it. So do it like this, but your way will be your way, not my way. That's what he essentially said. But people, they adore him. Now, in his case, I'm going to make an exception. I think that's okay. He's also not amongst us, but people that have that worldly bent, that worldly programming, and then you're standing on top of the mount with all this wonderful goodness, they just fall hopelessly and deeply and committedly in love with the good thing too. But it might be in a worldly way, see? So it's the imperfect way of loving that way. When you can have platonic love instead of, and you can also spread it around. You can, all living creatures, may all living creatures be well. May all dogs be well. Come on, can't you wish dogs well? Haven't you looked at a little furry face recently? Can't you wish all dogs well, not just the dog in front of you? What about canaries or little birds? Come on. How hard do you have to be to hate pigeons? Come on. Next time you see a pigeon, come on, wish them well. Wish them all well. That's your sign. Generate that in yourself. Experience that. Change your mind. Partake in all of that spiritual goodness. It's just ready to be activated. It's just there like a reservoir. It's there. It just needs to be activated. It needs to be experienced. It needs to be felt. And instead of that, and then you have that instead of the defilements, right? Instead of the aggravations, the sufferings, the disappointments, the accusations, the blame, the anger. the greed, the craving, the aversion, the delusion. You leave that behind. And you do that over and over and over and over and over again. Continue with that practice. A few words on chemical dependency or dependencies in a postmodern world. This is something I don't believe that the Buddha encountered to the degree that it's widespread in postmodern times, where you have many users of different chemicals. So chemical dependencies are in play. Look, one of the 5 precepts is no intoxicants. So look how simple the Buddha made it. That is the entry fee. You cannot play poker if you don't ante up the 5 precepts. So if you have a problem with chemical dependency, then you need to focus on it. And so look, I'm going to give people some tips. There are, for example, if you have a problem with alcohol, people go to AA, which is also, it's good. It's to be recommended to a certain degree, especially if you're really in a bad way, because you do need moral support, you need social support, you need other people going through the same thing as you, because it's really that bad. Because essentially people have lost their ability to control their life. They've lost control. Now, if you're in control of your life, if you're a young person of sound mind and body, which I hope you are, you might just glance over that, but it's a very dangerous condition to be in. If you're an adult and you can't control yourself because you're addicted to some chemical that you have to pay for, and maybe you can't hold a job and take the chemical at the same time, as is the case of alcohol. You cannot drink a bottle of vodka a day and still expect to earn money doing something. I mean, even low-level stuff. So I guess stacking lumber, look, they're digging holes, whatever, but I mean, it does make the hole digging a little bit more enjoyable, but still, it's really no way to live, digging holes or drinking like that. And like the hole digging job might dry up, and then what do you have then? You got a bad chemical dependency. And it really is down, it's not just the psychological side, which is really the most terrifying thing of all. That a thinking being could lose agency on the basis of chemical dependency. That's a terrifying reality that very many people experience at this time. So these things need to be taken seriously. Do not take any form of cocaine right off the bat. So no fentanyl, right? Absolutely not. So just right off the bat, any type of white powder, no. Okay, no chemicals at all, no pills, nothing, no needles. This stuff is bad news, so young people, listen to me. Don't pick it up. It is not a recommendation. This stuff is dangerous and it's prevalent. And it's destroyed countless lives. And it just takes one time and you can get hooked. It's that dangerous. That's why there's an epidemic out there. So just imagine putting a bullet in a chamber of a gun and spinning it and just putting it up to your head and pulling the trigger. I don't think you should do it. Some people get terribly addicted to that stuff, and it ruins their lives, the lives of their children, the lives of their friends and family, everything known to man. They're out there turning tricks on the street, no medical treatment, teeth knocked out, you name it. You don't want to end that way. And the first step starts with, oh, here's some white powder, just trying it out. Everybody's doing it. Something like that. It sounds corny, but it really does happen that way. So you got to be on your P's and Q's and just say no. Really. That was true then and it's true today. That's good practice. No intoxicants. And alcohol, look, this is something we have a big blind spot. Alcohol is the most dangerous drug in the world. And it's just sold next to water. People are dying all day long, all night long, due to alcohol. It's the most dangerous drug. So first off, I would just recommend right off the bat, no hard liquor at all. Vodka, forget it. Anything, I would say also wine, forget it. The only thing I would say, if you can't go to zero right off the bat, switch over to beer. And the lightest, the least amount of alcohol possible, so that you're almost like gagging if you're drinking it, because it's just a lot of fluid, essentially. It's not a lot of poison. So it'll make you feel stupid doing it. You have to come up with counterintuitive strategies to try to talk yourself out of chemical dependency, essentially. And it's more difficult than you think if you didn't fall into it in the first place. So that's why I tell young people, like, when somebody comes up and tells you this and you don't listen to it, that's a bad omen for you. But it's actually a good omen that somebody took the time to tell you what I'm telling you right now. Because the worst thing is that a lot of people didn't tell the people how dangerous the stuff was when they started. So you understand what I'm talking about? They glamorized it, right? They pushed it, and where it was glamorous and nice too, like not just in the ghetto. But people end up in the ghetto that start up at the top if they get hooked on that stuff. And again, all the people surrounding that business, they're no good. Like, there are people that use those types of positions to abuse people, essentially, that need something that they might be able to provide. So don't ever fall into that trap. There's some bad people out there doing some bad things. So, and guess what? They ain't going good places. They ain't, but living in hell, even as an innocent person, a snookered person, a bim bam, a doodly wop person, that's still hell. And where's the floor of hell? Do you have an elevator with only the buttons you know on it? Once you enter into the hell realms, you think, well, it's not going to go any further because I say so. When they've already walked through a blue door like that, and some thing has them in their clutches. Superstitious people, here you have an advantage. Not needing to know why not to do something. If you feel it right now, like the goosebumps, the fear, that cold wind, that sound, to remind you not to go that way. be advised. And let other people know it's not a game, it's not trivial at all. It's very dangerous. But again, for the people in it, they got to trick themselves out of it somehow. And a really good one is faith in the Buddha himself. That this was indeed the smartest man in many ways that ever lived. The most enlightened one. And he said, don't do it, so that's it. You don't need to know more than that. That can be a big help for simple people. Simple people that are superstitious also, this can be a big help to you. You will get the advantage of good practice just because of your faith. This is the simple and straight way. This is the wide, strong path. But for those without faith, they are off in the bushes. They're going to have to swim it, wade through. And the stream is not sluggish, and the rocks are slippery. They might not make it. They've certainly made their way trickier than it needed to be, and it might not work. But some people learn or have to learn the hard way. Some people aren't quite there in their practice. They are blocked. And they might want to push a button and not have that blockage. But that's not how this dimension works. They can also hear insightful things and gain no insight thereof because maybe they're distracted with this or that or this or that. Their minds were somewhere else. They missed the point. They didn't get it this time, but next time they might hear this part for the first time and finally get it. Oh my goodness. That's the way you do it. That's insightful practice. That's the benefit of faith, not the stupidity or gullibility of faith. 5 precepts, you have faith in that. Blind faith, why not? Well, how dangerous do you think that is compared to all the other unskillful things people do, thinking that they're trifling when they're not? I'll just get in this car and it doesn't matter that this guy's drunk, and then they drive off and they're never seen again. That's how fast tragedy can strike. And the results are irrevocable. These kinds of things are happening all the time, all over the place. But that doesn't have anything to do with skillful practice, now does it? Stay away from that stuff. And put severe restrictions on alcohol. I wouldn't even use it in a celebratory kind unless you can get away with it or can't get away with it. But why can't you get away with it? I think it can have its place in time, but it's not something that should be promoted. Something to be to be aware of and to avoid where possible, to limit where possible, curtail where possible, thin where possible. And if you have reached a level of weakness or you know it, just admit it and take the steps that people take in those situations. That there are other people going through similar things, and they can be very beneficial because they can tell you, especially if they're still sober or clean, the type of trials and tribulations that they had that you're likely having that they can help you with. And that's really how it's done, because you're both essentially holding on to each other for dear life. Because if you let each other down, you're gonna die. the way that way takes people to death. It's a way to death. It's a way of weakness and illness and disability, sickness, and limitation. But the good news is it's self-directed in a way. See, people are on autopilot. A lot of people are really dealing with subconscious suffering that they're not aware of. So they think it's them, but really they're suffering on a subconscious level because they're not going through the meditative, prayerful practice that they need to finally come to terms with what it is that's really bothering them and why. And depersonalizing that, such as my attachment to this idealized life that ultimately I didn't feel like I got, and that was just the basic disappointment or dissatisfaction that just anyone can have under those types of abstract circumstances. So once you see it, okay, that's what I'm doing, that's what's causing all of the agita that one is trying to medicate. And then one just disconnects the agita, like the underpinnings of it, like maybe by categorizing it. This is just basic unskillfulness, want this, have this. Why do I want this? Why don't I see what I have with different attitudinals? And why can't I do that? Well, of course I can do that. Look at how many things I have. Look how many great people I've gotten to interact with. Look at all the teachers, the wise, noble teachers you were able to read and understand. So look at the flowers right here. Look at the lighting right now. It's a twilight lighting. Look at the time of year. Look at right here, right now. That practice, always right here. Always right now. Also another fast practice just to get you started, to challenge your point of view, challenge your attitudinals. Say some affirmative things. If a lot of people are really deeply depressed because they've been doomerized, because they're projecting negative trends way out into the future, and it's rather demoralizing. But that's not helpful, is it? What part of skillful practice is that? Oh no, it's not a skillful practice, so don't do that. What is right here, what is right now, and guess what? The future is open. Could be a meteor strike tomorrow. Nobody can predict that. Earthquake, who's got the crystal ball on earthquakes? And then you've got famine, you got war, you got forest fires, you name it. It can happen and does, and it's really nobody's fault. But if you're doomerizing into a future based on current variables, that's not skillful practice. So don't do that. And save yourself a lot of suffering and a lot of delusion, because it's delusional. Here I am seeing this future. Why go that far to create suffering? It's ridiculous. You got to pull yourself back. Bring yourself back to right here, right now. And keep to that practice. The practice of that, like wake up, like oh, here I am right here. Focus on the breath. See, the breath is rhythmic, it's timed, it's anchored to your body. So you have just limited control. Of course you can hold your breath, but see the limits of the interaction? They're physical. So it's almost like a clock. You can set your attention to it rhythmically, and it will give you something to put your mind to, if you put your mind to it, because there is something there to be mindful of. But you're usually not mindful of it because you're usually on autopilot as far as breathing is concerned, and yet breathing is a rather dramatic movement of the body and its muscles. There's a lot of calories burnt in the breathing process. It's a rather essential bodily function, and yet how often are we aware of it unless we take the initiative and say, okay, wait a second. Let me take a deep breath. You see, that's how people gain composure. They gain clarity. They separate from the environment that they're in spiritually. They withdraw into themselves. They breathe in the breath. They feel the breath. And they detach. And see right there that you can see in that little snapshot how valuable that process could be if you can if you can deepen it. Right? You can deepen it and stabilize it while maintaining a casual awareness, but a specific awareness of the breath as your breathing becomes more rhythmic. And you're just monitoring that. It's keeping your mind on something that you can be mindful of if you're mindful of it, because it's there. It is there. You just haven't been noticing, but now you're noticing. And it's very light, and you feel the coolness on the nostrils. Right? You start noticing more details. And you can just extend that out, right? Some masters can extend that out to hours at a time, all day, all night practice. There's been, for example, the Tibetan monks have a very proud tradition of certain austerities as well, although sometimes it can go towards the extreme, but each practitioner needs to know for oneself what is what. Sitting practice, which also works well with the 1 meter monastery. The sitting practice that they had, some of them sat for months at a time, years. Now, these are just different versions. I would say that veers into the austerities, but just think of the dedication that they have. That is just on a whole different level. So if you think you can bring what's required, they are the signposts that no, in fact, you might not be firm enough in your practice just yet. And that the practice, once firm, can take you much further than what normal people could otherwise endure. Because it's not really endurance, it's awareness. Now, also for some people that are too far gone with their chemical dependencies, I would say another simple rule might be take nothing that you don't grow yourself. And don't grow too much of something that would make you sick. If you think of Odinic practice, they were living in the forest, right? So they did not abuse the things of the forest. They did not eat the poisons of the forest. But they knew the attributes of the forest. So how many of them were dying horribly of alcoholism in pure nature as a percentage, do you think? Well, I'll I'll tell you, it was pretty low. It was a lower percentage of what we see in postmodern, urban, even rural conditions of today. So don't forget how powerful the practice can be, and part of the practice is maybe including more nature into your life and more solitude and slower living, dialing things down to zero. Like the sitting practice, that's the discipline, really. You say, I want to walk, I want to do walking practice. I do a lot of walking practice because I'm a fast horse and a stubborn horse. See, the fast horse needs to pace. But that sitting practice, that's very definitive. That's also Kane style, in my opinion. And that there is a finality to it. It's like putting a period at the end of the sentence when you sit on that mat. And your body will want to go this way, that way, lean this way, lean that way, but you can regulate it and still the mind with one pointed practice. It's a useful exercise to consider things on an abstract, simplified level if we come to the concept of governance. Scale it down. Our countries have become too big. Let's scale it down to the smallest governmental unit. Let's get back to a village or a city. You have the walls, right? You have the management of the walls, the maintenance of the walls, the manning of the walls. You have directives at the gate, who can come in, who can't, who belongs in the city, who doesn't. And then within the city, you have the functions of the city and how they're managed, who's managing them, how. If the butcher has problems, then the people aren't getting enough food, and then it's a problem for everyone. So if the butcher's having a problem, it's probably good that somebody, or he talks to somebody before it becomes a big problem. Like all of a sudden, where's this crowd coming from with pitchforks trying to burn things down? Well, they haven't. What's the reason? Well, we have 3 families here that haven't had enough to eat. What's happened here? You see how things can be really simple? And then you find out, like you have a panel, and the panel sits down, the committee, and then there's different people who this person says this is the reason, then that person says no, that isn't the reason, it's actually this reason. And there might be vested interests. And it might be, well, there are people in the woods to come out and they are killing the farmers. And so the farmers had to run away, and so now there's no food. Like things like that, you see? Well, what does that mean for the safety or continuity or well-management of the realm? See, then all of a sudden it's sort of, well, it's not just on the inner workings of the city, it's the region around it. You can't have a bunch of bandits killing farmers. So what is to be done? Well, you gotta put together some reconnaissance, don't you? Maybe some cavalry. Start thinking about making some bows and arrows and coming up with some counter strategies. Start collecting some more information about the problem so that you can potentially eliminate the problem. You see how that works? And why? Because there's people starving. Because that's not a good thing. That's not something that should necessarily be tolerated. You got 5 dead farmers on your hands and a lot of hungry people. So it's not like it's a problem that shouldn't be addressed. You see, if you're capable of addressing it. Now, if you're too weak, too separated, too angry with each other, you can't talk, you can't sit down at a committee and come up with these types of solutions, well, then that's sort of your a priori problem. Then it might move in. They're not just living beyond the tree line, they're now at the gates. They're besieging the city. Now, if you didn't have some type of strategic plan in place, then you're probably gonna lose the city. Now, what happens when you lose the city? Well, it's essentially a brigand force that is able to compel the countervailing force to be defeated and thereby be replaced. So what is the booty in between? What's the booty left over? That's what the new brigands get. And then, depending on how well or how poorly they manage the problems that the previous set of administrators had to deal with, depends on whether or not the city will flourish or not. For example, during the siege, the baker was murdered and his whole bakery burned down, and so now there's a need for bread. So if the new administration doesn't figure that out, well, then maybe 20-30% of the population is going to die. But then again, maybe he doesn't care. Like, he's happy with what's left over and doesn't do anything, and then maybe that's a mistake because the 70% of people, the 30 people decided, you know what, this new administration isn't really what it's cooked up to be, so maybe we'll either leave, flee with what we can take, or maybe we're going to try to take them out. And maybe it's successful, maybe it's half successful, maybe some people do both strategies, and the city, over time, atrophies and dies out. Like 30 years later, it's not even mentioned as a city, and nobody really knows what the last days, I think, of tyranny looked like under those conditions of variability, of chance and randomness. Now, the people 1,000 miles away, they just didn't care what happened there. And if they're never going there, they never knew it was there, why should they care? So social cohesion is important. It's really the foundational principle. So anything attacking that is ipso facto bad. But you have to look into what are, let's say, non-ideological incursions into a social body. What would a natural community and natural cohesion look like, and work with that instead of some person that believes that you should throw all these things together and force it to make it work. See, that's sort of a sadistic way of doing things. Like, imagine you have a cage and you throw lions and gorillas and tigers all in the same cage, and you say, okay, they all have to live like this because they're all the same. They're just animals. And if they have problems with each other, none of them are happy, right? The tigers don't like the lions don't like tigers. The chimps are getting mauled every other day. That's a sadistic administration of animals, right? What do? We have the tiger habitat that reflects natural habitats where tigers are most happy and most content. And then we have the gorilla cage, or not cage, we have a terrarium where their environmentals are optimized in somewhat of a micro environment so that they feel comfortable. They have trees, they have things that they would have otherwise in the wild, and thereby flourish, right? They're not stressing out about tigers. So that's the opposite approach. That's the humanistic approach. That's the anthropologically realistic approach. Which is also not to say you need a complete monoculture, but you need at least the fundamentals of micro environments that are conducive to the peoples that are living in them. And this brings us also back to the Normans. I think the Normans were all over the place. The Normans were travelers. They were Vikings, some would say. And they ended up in different places. They were on the Norman coast. They were in Sicily. They were in Italy. They took over England at one point. And they had a great administration. I mean, taking over a region means that they had to reset the administrative conditions, which weren't necessarily always straightforward or good in a perfect sense, but they certainly reestablished conditions that led to the flourishing of the places that they were in. And if you depoliticize everything, if you look at it from a cultural, anthropological standpoint, you can see that yes, they had essentially created a high culture out of nothing. Or let's not say nothing, but whatever was there before. Now, what was there before might have been good in a certain sense for the people there, but certainly after the change happened, we can say that a better administration was put into effect. So it was more or less looking from the bird's eye view of 100 years. The transitional period wasn't the best, but it set the preconditions for a better system. So it was sort of an evolutionary process in cultural terms. Now, of course, people will debate this. You'll have people will try to politicize that if they don't like it, if they identify with some group that got squashed in the process, then of course they're going to debate that point. But it's questionable why they would take these types of odd positions in a time like this. So you might be dealing with someone who has an ideology that is just there to attack things. Like attack all the time, attack anything that would attempt to change any type of status quo, and even have the potentiality of changing the status quo. This brings me back to the environmentalists. When the environmentalists got kicked off or became more politically relevant, that's when they got noticed by totalitarians and Marxist-Leninists and all their other infiltrating first strike cultural agitators and what have you. And so that's why they attacked it and eventually infiltrated, subverted it, and turned it into the opposite of what it was intended to be. They direct it to the wrong things, like attacking the energy sector for political reasons because they're affiliated with a geopolitical group that wants to sell energy to make money, to influence negatively the socioeconomic, political entity that might not be entirely favorable to the other entity, should they not take these influencing measures to subvert, suppress, corrupt, and diminish the other side by asymmetric means. So, good for them, maybe, I guess, unless they screw things up to the point where there's a reaction. But they're against those reactions. They want to keep that status quo the same. So environmentalism is what they say. So anything outside of that is hate. Okay? We're talking about political operatives here, not philosophers or holy people, moral people, good people. Okay? We're talking about interested people, plug and play people, straight up liars, disinformationists that will not admit certain truths, pretend not to know things, reframe things as conspiracies. They just told you this, but actually the opposite is true. You know, that type of, those types of people that really get off on that. How about just straight lying? If you're a Christian or a philosophical Western person, lying. How about also a Buddhist person? 5 precepts: don't lie. That's one. One of the fingers on your hand, one hand, don't do it. They have a culture of lying. Like if they're not lying, they feel like they're not putting in the work. So they try to learn the truth in order to misrepresent it. Because that's their work. Because that's their power. They take the agency in the matter of misrepresenting the truth of the thing. So that is a segment of society that's very active, lots of different factions of that, very active, worldly people that are organizing on a political level. They're very, very, very active all over the place. Not just in politics, but anything that could be remotely influencing with politics. See, again, environmentalism, it brings people together. Then these people start talking about other problems. They could change the status quo. So who do they first strike? That's who they first striked. And so now it's just a poor imitation of the original thing. Oh, I want to go to church. I want to have religion free of the malign influence. Well, too bad. All your churches have been pre-targeted by people that have vested interest in, for example, tyrannical sadism or spineless sadism, and political, geopolitical considerations that you're not really sort of aware of or would think were more important than having spirituality free of those things. But they didn't think that that was good for them, so that's why you don't have it. But it's not presented as if there's nothing there. They have their version of things, and that's the only thing allowed because that's their monopoly, they think. If they can get away with it. Now, how do they get away with it? We don't know. A lot of these crimes are unsolved. They're not considered crimes by a lot of people that are as ignorant as they come. And keeping people ignorant is something they like to do. See, this is why they use the word misinformation, because it's information that's not politically convenient for the status quo. Which, if you have a tyranny or something that expresses itself via tyrannical sadism, which is sort of a definition of it, then you can see why they would do something like that, be so proactive in such bad ways, you feel. But that's from your perspective. From their perspective, they're doing the politically, how shall we say, politically important thing for whatever long-term, complex interests might be in the area or wanting to expand into the area. And so they have that interest to suppress and invert and subvert your cultural norms, your culture, your people, your economy, everything that they can in a pre-war activity spectrum. So the West right now is shot through with that, like all over the place. Just toxicity that has been pre-positioned and is in an incumbency and undeclared. Everything they do is good on the up and up above board. Everything you do is suspicious, is morally reprehensible, is questionable, is evil. And it's just that childish, on that childish, malignant, narcissist type of level. Whataboutism. I did this, yeah, but you did that, right? I might be this bad, but you're that much worse. And it's always like that. That's what their sophistry has done to their intellectuals. Given them a set of techniques to bully and suppress and attack other people on a variety of different levels that aren't considered to be real in stupefied Western environments. Where there's really no threat. There's no threat to, moral inversions. That's just, some people say it's happening, some people say it isn't, some people are on board with it. So what's your problem? See? Slick brigands. Sweet talking slick brigands. That's essentially their cultural operatives. But of course, who can spot that? Well, you guessed it, authentic people. But again, what are they fighting against? Just general cultural decline, they like to put this in just sort of innocuous terms. Yeah, people all decided on this, but this is what's being splattered out of the information networks in the information sphere. These are the poisonous gases that are patently false, destroy social cohesion. But there's a lot of denialism that that's actually what they're doing, because only bad people think that what they're doing is bad. So they say. And how many of them are there? There might just be 500 of them that are in on this little geopolitical positioning. And screw the rest if they can't get them out of where they are and what they're doing. Then so if we come back to our village equivalents, you have the walls, there's like a little newspaper shop or something, a cigarette shop, and you have, let's just say, a poisonous toad that is pretending to be an upstanding citizen, but he's handing out flyers saying that the king is some type of black magician or something like that. And so, what would you do with someone like that if you? But of course, it's a question of, was it that obvious, or was it someone who's essentially talking about, let's say, civic issues? Because of course, not everything is going to be running right. Okay, there are personalities involved. There is a human dimension. Is it written in a way that's just black propaganda, just negative, just just criticizing, just demonizing? Is it that? Is it that clear, or are there elements of truth in it, and how much of it is truth? What were the intentions behind it, and then maybe who put them up to it? If, for example, this is the second time this has happened in an irrelated area and it's the same text, then and they use certain words that indicate that they come from a place that uses a different language and has different cultural norms, you see, things like that. Maybe it's not just a personal thing. Maybe it's not just homegrown. But then again, maybe it is. If it is, then you can deal with that in a different way, can't you? You don't have to have a one-size-fits-all policy for people that you think might be undermining the status quo, when in fact, maybe the status quo isn't the best thing at that time. Maybe they have a few insights. Maybe it's insightful. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it's threatening. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it's not a big deal. Maybe people are overreacting. But it really does depend. If you have a despot, a complete lunatic, a malignant narcissist, a sadist, I guess we'll be able to forecast or predict what the possible outcomes of that would be. But why would that be considered the preferable thing to do by any kind of enlightened leadership which doesn't have those traits? Well, that might be the expectation of good people, but good people can get caught up in systems that get taken over in the ways I've just mentioned without being told that they've been taken over, and the people have a tenuous grip on their power because essentially they have no legitimacy. The way they got it was via illicit and criminal means. So there you can see why certain despotic trends can also continue to be despotic until it comes to the public attention, which at that point could provoke a fundamental response to those that are essentially illegitimate, are in on some type of boilerplate astroturfism that has ideological components to it that are just politically expedient, but not wise in any sense of the word. Diverters of public funds into private coffers. Wealth guarders and their multiple layers of legalistic defense, all the way into the information sphere where the official narrative is economy is just booming, but why don't so many people seem to think that? Well, that's not what their information sphere is looking to work with. They have their narrative and that's it. So if you're not in the booming economy, something must be wrong with you. But of course, they also are engaged in spineless sadistic practices like blacklisting and canceling people. But that's actually not happening either, they say, just to the right people, or people that are questionable in some way. But of course, mistakes are made, but generally, their heart is in the right place, they say, or at least the people that they pay to say that, because people that they wouldn't pay to say that, they fire those people that would say something different or entertain the other side. Malignant narcissists would do that. They don't accept criticism on any level. So you can see that bad government takes on bad psychological characteristics, which are, it's possible to diagnose them if you're an expert in such things. Which is, it is determinate on the culture. It has a stupefying, impoverishing effect on it. And that's where we, again, get to the split between the tactical, the wealth, tactical, diverting people versus the strategically sound people, which is what an administration should be. And if it's not that, well, then you sort of know what you're dealing with, and then you know who's involved in it because they're guilty by association. the blob plus whoever is the representatives of that blob. And it's not enough just to remove the representatives and not remove the blob. You need to do both if you start to manifest the types of negativity, sadism, and narcissism that I mentioned. However, realize to protect themselves, they will use Machiavellianism and psychopathy. So they will plan to injure the people that could change the status quo. So, and that's not just in direct action, but just a whole series of indirect actions. How about taxing people? I love how they come up with these predatory scams, essentially. So you'll get Alibaba and his 40 thieves and the equivalent of that in an administration that thought the election wasn't rigged. And then, of course, there's never losing an election after that, as far as they're concerned. But they'll do something stupid like go around, and there were speeding limits of 30 miles an hour. They'll have those all lowered to 20, so you have to drive excruciatingly slow for no reason, and then put like speed cameras right behind those areas that they changed to just collect that money. So that's just something like that practice. That's not something that should be tolerated. That's something that should be identified. Here you have a predatory alien administration, and this is what they do, and the net effect of that should not be underestimated. See, but it is sort of like a parasitical strategy. So they're just trying to nail people that they can on scams like that, but that's not too much. See, they don't want to kill the golden goose, right? But it's just annoying enough, and it's just enough money for them to essentially rent seat. But for the public, once you become aware of that, then essentially that's a reflection on the entire administration, not just on one or two stooges or front people or patsies. And you have to go through the whole decision-making chain. How did that go? What legal bodies did it go through that approved that measure? And then the people, who were the companies putting in the speed cameras and all of that, all the way down the line. They're all implicated. And so you can use those little things as a very clear indicator. Just like when you're diagnosing some disease, like there's a disease where maybe you'll get blue spots on your leg or something, that indicates you have this. It's like a clear indicator. Well, those types of little scams are a clear indicator that you're infected with a tyrannical, spineless, sadist, despotic, tyrannical government administration, and potentially culture. If you've been culturally suppressed, how did they manage to win the election, right? What are their information? What do you call it? Information sphere look like? They have 2-3 papers. Who are they owned by? Take a look. What have they printed for the last, let's say, 5 years? And then to classify that in terms of misinformation or cultural vandalism. And I also think that you can use that as a basis for legal proceedings against the perpetrators. But of course, doing that does require political will, requires organization, and it requires resistance and not accepting. Making a line in the sand saying, all right, this is a little dumb indicator, but actually it says a lot, and so right now we know what we have to do. And just resolve ourselves to do that. And realize that they won't want to go. They won't want to let some type of change happen in the way it should change in legitimate ways, because they're essentially illegitimate psychologically first. The fruits of that illegitimacy are just the other illegitimacies. But that illegitimacy includes sadism, meaning they don't think you're redeemable, and the narcissism, that the criticism is an existential threat to their egoic fantasies of supremacy over people they've dehumanized. So you need to see them not on the level of equality, but rather as somewhat of a life or death struggle. Because it is. If they are able to do it, the best case scenario is that things will atrophy over a long period of time, but that's not a given. That's another way to see them. Regions, if you go into the statistics and the data, if you look at certain key things like deaths by despair shoot up, that's a way of delineating when, let's just say, the levels of sadism were increased to a war crime, a cultural war crime level. Now, it might have been the economics that did it, it might have been something else, or a combination. But essentially, you're looking at the beginning of a cultural war crime, and you have also the data. They killed 10,000 people that otherwise would be alive in this year due to their sadistic administrative practices, including neglect, which is included in sadism, not addressing the issues at hand, such as the wild spread of drugs amongst people while they were managing the police department. That's criminal neglect, that's sadistic neglect. It's the sadism behind the neglect that makes it a cultural war crime. So then, yeah, you're talking about people that are indirectly, if you add that up over years, let's say 5 years, 70,000 people died. Then you're dealing with people, let's say 100 organizers of that event, and then maybe they siphoned, who knows, 250 million or a billion into their enterprises at the same time. So then there's that financial component. So what would be the proper sentence for people indirectly involved in that type of indirect violence against the people they were predating upon during that period? That's something that future courts will have to come up with. But of course, I believe the public would also be involved in deciding whether or not the sentence was too light or not sufficient, and things of that nature. It's also something, it signals to the other side like what's tolerable and what's not. And if, let's say, one city that has 500,000 cultural war deaths, that what is done to the people that were responsible for that might have a chilling effect on other brigands around the world not to attempt similar things. Instead of the reverse of that, signaling, if you don't remedy that situation, that this is the new model that other skunk groups should come in and feast on because it's so lucrative. See, because they do like to take selfies of themselves in front of like Bentleys filled with cash and drugs and weapons. And that does get sent back to whatever hellholes they came from, and incites others to be as successful as they are. And so it has that sucking effect out of these monstrous zones into better places. But again, who would like that? Well, enemies like that. Enemies of your country, your culture, your people. Parasitical factions. Self-enrichers, criminally minded people, they like that. So guess what good people, guess what good people aren't? Good people are not stupid. Stupidity is bad. So if you're a good person, you're not stupid. So now you know. So now you're not stupid. So would it be stupid to allow these things to continue? I would say, yeah, that's sort of in the stupidity side of things. But stupid people do stupid things mostly because they don't know better. But now that you know better, then you just have to start acting better. And one way is, of course, protecting yourself, those around you, raising awareness, but there's also measures that can, let's say, mess up their business model somehow, make it a little bit more difficult for them when the pretenses aren't as unclear about who and what they are and how they operate, such as researching malignant narcissistic personalities and how that's just the norm for them, and then how that makes them react in certain situations and how you can predict they would react based on that lockstep reality that they're in. They're not going to get out of that. They're not. A lot of them aren't. So that is a limiting factor that they have. It's discernible. It's like they're walking around in red clothes. You can see them. So it's a lot easier than if you were just to take them at face value, which again is what they're banking on. They think good people are stupid, but good people don't have to be stupid forever. So if you were stupid, don't stay stupid, and then start doing the smart things. And you know what? Smart is not entertaining brigands or making excuses for them or rationalizing their behavior. That's stupid on an individual level, and on a social level, it's just incomparably imbecilic. So I'd just say they had a good ride. They had the first strike advantage, just like a criminal taking a hammer to someone's face that wasn't expecting it. But after that period, which we can call, let's say, 1917 to 2025, then we can just call that the first strike period. And now we're entering into the, let's say, block and strike period, the second stage of understanding the fluidity and complexity of the world in which we live, not the world in which we wish we had, which is that perfect world, the heavenly world awaiting us all that are of heavenly heart and mind. Now here's the good news for all Westerners, that now that we know what was in play, what's happened, who did it, we can forgive ourselves for all of the bad policies that were committed against us dating back to 1919. So we can forgive ourselves. We can forgive our country. We can forgive the people that failed to protect us. We can forgive the victims. I wouldn't say we should forgive the perpetrators. That we're not that far yet, because they're still conducting acts of mass violence, suppression, essentially sadism against our people, and virtue signaling while they do that, because that's their slick way of operating, is that they present themselves one way but act a completely different way, but see a sort of political science type of congruency between doing that. They consider that pragmatic operations. So a normal person takes them at face value and gets tricked. That's sort of how it works. But they knew they were going to trick you when they came up with the gaslighting, i.e. the propaganda and the consensus that they have amongst their cadre that are in on it. So it's understandable that if people that don't have all the facts are presented with their ideology, that they can rook them, they can trick them, they can deceive them. And the further down you go down their ideological rat hole, the harder it is to back up. Especially if you become radicalized, they get you to commit crimes. They blame other people. I mean, they get these torpedoes wound up to basically be a form of human kamikaze. They're absolutely out of their mind. They're berserkers. They're ripping down statues. They're committing mass robbery, vandalism, burn the whole city down. So it's a scale. They can ramp that up if they decide all at once that there's a social issue that they fabricated that's the big thing, and it's going to be that way until they decide that they've done enough or have been stopped. So they might go back down to a simmer after, let's say, 3 months of pillaging and random acts of violence. And then it'll go in remission. You know, all the burnout stores and everything they messed up, that'll stay the same. But then maybe things will cool over. Maybe a couple people will get paid. Like they'll come up with some type of transfer payments because they have to come to some type of agreement with the forces that are rampaging and pillaging, essentially. So maybe something like that happens, some form of that, and then it stays in remission until, 2, 3, 4, 5 months, to 2 years, who knows? Whenever they decide to ramp something up again. And it also could be not just because of internal domestic politics, it could be that their other cronies in geopolitical areas have decided that they're going to take an antagonistic approach to problems that people that were operating in good faith would probably come to a very quick and amicable solution to, but they have decided not to do that because they've been told not to do that because they're getting paid and are controlled by the people that have told them not to do that. But of course, all within a civilian context. These are just hip people that know that the future has to look this way, which is really strange and bent and genocidal and utopianistic. But again, if we're talking about young people, not informed people, people not in the know, people taking them at face value, well, then you see how that shtick can propagate itself. Of course, they also take out other countervailing sources of information by putting them in an arbitrary class that they despise, i.e. accomplished, educated people that they label whatever, neo-Nazis, fascists, bourgeois. See, bourgeois is the nice version of labeling you. See, it sounds so innocuous. It's what, is it French? Isn't that cute? Do you speak French? Person that would speak French would be sort of slightly above average, educated person, not some type of hideous, stupefied blob member that's just pretending to have their sophisticated rhetorical flourishes. Oh, you don't know? I guess you're not educated. You're not in the superior position to understand what's real culture and what's not. And these people are actually bad, despite looking to be the accomplished, venerable, straight shooting people that they are, because they're not seeing things our way. So obviously, they're in a class of their own that deserves to be put into camps or dispossessed or predated upon or regulated or told what to do, right? Like the professors in the Chinese Cultural Revolution that had to wear the dunce caps and were given a hysterical berating by the ideological cadre that have been worked up into psychotic furor. So, but again, that's the top of the scale. They'll bring that down to a simmer, low boil. Maybe it's just steaming, keeping that water just below the boiling point to sterilize the social space from essentially anyone that can put two and two together and perhaps judge them in a not so favorable light based on reality, not the way they want reality to be presented. So all Westerners, forgive yourself for all these horrible cultural, legalistic, financial disasters. All of that can be attributed to them without over exaggerating. Right now, people are under exaggerating. And their influence is a big part of that. Like, they're really just still the progressive, smart, inside moral people all the time. Because if they can't present themselves that way, if most people don't see them that way, then they would be disposed, wouldn't they? So I think it is good to challenge their narratives. Come up with some things to challenge the narrative, and then, again, stop taking them at face value. If they were associated with the left, you're essentially dealing with terrorism, domestic terrorism, which is always why they're trying to point the focus towards non-existent oppositionists in ideological terms, because of course they have to have a fake counter point to themselves, which is essentially a projection of what they would do if they were the opposition, because we're in that malignant, narcissist, gasballless kind of a way of interpreting the world, and attitudinals, and then also the rationalization for using violence and criminality against someone who's is plotting all the time, just like they are, because they're incapable of seeing things any other way, because they're essentially undiagnosed, mentally impaired, mentally deficient, morally impaired, morally deficient individuals that have doublethink, have dual strategies, have parallel realities going on in their minds to suit themselves, essentially. So it's funny that very subnormal demographics would be more prone to be infected with that pathogenic way of thinking, but essentially anybody can adopt it. Like little snide, prickish, spoiled, encapsulated, separated smuggies from your own native population can, in many cases, be brought over to that point of view. However, there are a lot of internal inconsistencies, especially when they're all supposed to be under the sadistic umbrella, but it actually doesn't work out that way due to reasons that anyone else could have probably understood more easily, but they don't. However, don't underestimate the bonds of criminality. Like, criminal groups are very diverse. Like, the guy who will pick the locks might come from some filthy place and have his own little filthy perspective on the globe and life and whoever he's thieving from. And then, the fence could be another group of very low caliber people, might be into drugs, into who knows what, weird games, weird associations. Like, a lot of the world is barbaric. Like, we seem to put a veneer on things. We want to gloss things over. We like to mirror. But there are all... You just go out into the woods. You don't know who's there. It can be moral people that have maintained their traditions and maintained their ethics and maintained their security. And on the other hand, it might not be. It might be the exact opposite of what you would expect. Instead of finding something nice, you find a bunch of bandits instead. Right? A bunch of people wearing funny uniforms and with funny accents that, because your country's so great, somehow they got into power and have been there ever since and think it's a great country, don't they? So, yeah, forgive all of yourselves. This was an attack. It was meant to be an attack. It's an ongoing attack. It's just the you can. Those types of attacks are more effective the more cover they can have. But as things fall apart, that cover falls apart, and so their story falls apart. And then you can see them just doing consistently bad things, essentially what a terrorist would do. And so thereby you can see them more in the open, especially because they're having varying degrees of success against the West in different places because the conditions there are different. But for example, if they're trying to bust problems into your area, it's probably a sign that they want to permanently mess up your area. And so that's sort of how you should understand it as well. So what would you do about people that are playing the piss, trying to take the piss, as they say in the British Isles? Want you to take the piss on their public relations, but just deliver nonsense and all different types of things instead. Because this is another gimmick where they bust them to regions. They have little helpers there, a lot of them working out of churches. I heard the Anglican Church is cooked as they come, Orthodox cook, obviously. I heard the Lutherans were the ones helping them in places like Minnesota, distributing them to places where they can collect government money. But, you try to collect that as someone off the street and they'll deny you. So, and then you just have to think, what would someone that hated your country, essentially, and was in on some type of criminal, governmental, fake election, bring people in and do things a completely different way, what would they do in that position to scam the system? And if you ask that question, then guess what will start making sense? Well, all of their actions. Then you have to think of the hardworking people paying taxes into a general fund that's then being paid out to people being bussed in from hostile third parties. And that's essentially what you're looking at. So the level of disdain and hate and murderous intent, criminal intent is way higher. You see, people just playing types of take the piss games, you wouldn't think they would be on that level, but they are. Now, on the other hand, let's not forget a lot of these people just want to downplay the genocidal aspects of it. They just want to just think of the money game. If they're thinking of these people that they can use to exploit and just the government loophole, then they're really just looking at the money. The side effects, they don't care. They're trying to downplay the side effects of a scam, essentially. But what a dumb thing to do. Like, these are not smart people, really. But if a lot of them have been able to get away with it for a long time. So these are essentially people, you can usually see them when they're trying to set up shop in a new place that was considered to be off limits because it was so far away. Now they're moving into that territory as well. But usually emanating out from the cities and then into the regions. They usually set up shop in the cities first. There's more cover and there's more to take there. But then once they're established there, then the other cronies have to move out, and that's what they do. So that's where you see them starting to hit rural communities. And they also don't have to worry about crime. They have law-abiding citizens that they predate on. They're the criminals, essentially. But they're the police. On paper. Because elections, right? Snap your fingers. Because nobody was paying attention and they took acting classes and essentially they say so. So they show up, they must watch movies so they can, they probably when they get out of their car, like they're usually slouched like a slug with something up their butts. But when they get out of the vehicle, like the Hollywood vehicle that they're legally allowed to drive around, then they gotta straighten themselves up like they're watching the movies, put on some goofy hat, walk up to the door, dong, dong, dong. Hello, ma'am, here's a summons, or I saw you got a chicken coop out there. It's gonna be $1,000 fine, right? With the gun and everything else. So you would think people wouldn't be that stupid, but why would you think that? Why? Why not? Because people do all different kinds of things, play all different kinds of games, do all different kinds of things, all take all different kinds of ways. And so, yeah, it is also sort of a cascading thing. Like the first they took out the big things, then the regional, and then they're moving downstream. Now the hope is that the next administration can clear this up because now that it's verifiable, you can also do something about it. But who knows, right? If you only got two parties and they're sort of a mono party, and also if these people are total rats, okay? So if they catch wind that there's a popular movement where there's people, good people that will take them on face value, they are jumping on that ship to beat the band. That they know where the feed is. They're not the sinking ship. They don't have anything. They might keep some working relationships if they can, but they're jumping for the new grain. So, and they're going to work even if you get two or three in on the new ship. They're going to be working tirelessly to gut it. And if the administration's in for like 20 years, they end up overtaking the entire ship. So you have to have your eyes peeled. They found a political vector. There was a weakness there. It was a system that was dependent upon civic engagement, and there wasn't enough, or they suppressed it. And then they organized themselves into a criminal operation and ran it professionally, organized from abroad. Then you can see they found that vector, they used that vector. Now, how far will they get? Is it a terminal disease or is it not? Will the immune system take them out? That's the hope. But if not, guess what? Tumors, if from their perspective, they're the tumor. So as much nutrients they can suck out of the body and destroy, devour the brain and turn it into goo, like bacteria, that's essentially their equivalent. That's what they're going to do. Whatever they can get into and devour, that's what they do. While keeping the pretense that they're not doing that. So test their pretenses, expose them, and also remove them. But you can also do that just by looking at the big picture. Crime stats are an indicator. There's economic stats. There's satisfaction. Again, 10% satisfaction rates over 10 years. There you know everything you need to know. What do you need to know? And that's it. That's what you're dealing with. And I do think people that have been associated with just genocidal administrations, that they should be considered to be culpable in some way. Just the stink, there's a stink on them. And you shouldn't let that stink be forgotten. They certainly did a lot of stinky things. I mean, if you think 10,000 deaths by despair is something trivial, well, then, you know, you're not really someone that anyone should care about either, I would say. But there are people like that, so it's just a question of how many people will care more. They care about taking things and doing things the wrong way. They really do. They really care about how they present themselves to the public. But why should we care? That's a question you need to ask yourself more, because the way things are going, they're already showing their hands. They're already highly visible, but not to everyone. Coming back to the concept of subconscious processes, I really want to put the focus on those again and again and again, because the problem is with consciousness is that we feel like we're aware of everything that is the matter. when in fact that is not true. We have these subconscious processes working all the time, and they can also be working against us. But there are ways we can catch these processes, especially if they veered off into the unwholesome territory. And we've defined unwholesomeness to be essentially things leading to the defilements: greed, ill will, and delusion, craving, aversion. Right? And so subconscious is part of, it's in the Venn diagram with ignorance. See, we're ignorant of the drivers of our attitudinals. And because we're ignorant of them, they're not reversible or addressable. We cannot confront them. When, for example, they're unwholesome, but first, of course, we have to have the values. We value wholesomeness, and then we're going to move from that value, take right effort to see what's the matter, and also take what effort to counter whatever attitudinal is leading to the defilements. And it sounds simple, but it isn't really simple, because ignorance is something that can disguise things. We can forget to be watching out for subconscious processes, because that's not how human beings normally consciously go through life. They can't do it. That's why they're subconscious. It's in your computer, there's like 1,000 processes going on that are supporting the applications you're using, but you're just on the user interface level. But essentially, you have to debug your program. If, for example, the defilements are coming up, anger, your anger levels start going up, your computer starts spinning like, bzzz, ever have that? Like the ventilator's just going crazy, and it's getting hotter and hotter, but everything seems to be normal. Well, yeah, that's the indicator. You got to debug the system. Go into the activity monitor, what's using 100% of the CPU. That's the process. You didn't see it. You just, by inference, came to the awareness that something must be wrong. But again, what does the human being do? The human being usually externalizes these internal processes. So to solve the anger issue, for example, is to express anger. Because that's essentially what your body and mind is telling you to do. It's saying, you're angry, so act like an angry person. How does an angry person act? It's giving you the false positive that it's okay to be angry with situations where the anger is not based in externalities. They're based on that internal process that you're not confronting and disabling and shutting down. And there's different reasons people do that. First off, they think it's a part of them, that this should define them. People tell them that they're angry, and because you feel angry and you see that they recognize that, you take that to be an immovable attribute. This belongs to you because you are yourself, and self-egoic commitment is what people do, because that's what people with strong characters do, because they're strong characters, because people from the outside have strongly defined what they believe their internals to be, when in fact that also might be a delusional thing to do. Especially if we're projecting, shadoic projection. This is what malignant narcissists do all the time. They're so internally focused, so internally located, so self-centered, as they say, centered in self, captured by self. I, me, mine. Me, mine. Big baby this, big baby that. Big baby angry, big baby tantrum. But of course, it's not, the baby doesn't reflect on how they're thinking and doesn't have any countering strategies. They're in the narcissistic evolutionary phase, in the infantile phase of narcissism, the infantile way of thinking, not the philosophic way of thinking or being. Now, some people, they're not going to make it in this life. They're not going to reflect on the principles and processes, or prioritize them, or consider them optional. They won't. It's not normal to do that. It's super normal. But super normalcy is a thing. It has to be, right? It's normal people get angry at certain things, but it's really super normal when people don't get angry at things that normal people would be angered by. Of course, it's within limits, right? It's not something you want to set out to do. Like, all right, I'm going to prove I'll never get angry about things that are quite irritating. It also might take you some time, no matter how good your practice is. It might take you some time not to get angry about something, right? If you can stop being angry after 5 minutes, that's really good practice. You're in the upper, like 1 percentile of humanity if you have that skill. Within 5 minutes, give yourself 5 minutes. And for my people that take 10 minutes or 15 or maybe an hour, how about one day? You're still pretty good. Pretty good. Much better than you think. Because some people hold grudges to the grave and think it's a good thing too. Like, of course it wouldn't be high-minded of them to forget some type of trifling thing, even if it was quite aggravating years ago. But why do they see things that way? Isn't that a misperception? Isn't that vulgar to hold on to things of that nature, of an annoying nature? It's like, I have a collection of annoying things in my mind. Wow. Who cares? Like, why are you storing that junk? You don't need it. It doesn't add to your life. But there you are, like a collector of annoying things, like a museum of annoyance. Isn't that strange? Now, I recently heard the theory that has to do with the survival mindset, that we are built to survive, so we're built to focus on problems. Because if we don't focus on problems, like the fire spreading from the hearth to someplace else, if we don't catch that problem and do something about it, then it could lead to us dying. So it's that infused into the survival instinct, this problem focused mind, this mind that goes from problem to problem to problem. And if you happen to be an HSP, that can go into the multiverse of doomeristic ways of thinking and feeling if we don't stop ourselves and say, hey, wait a second, this is the wrong way. I'm not using my superpowers to get super down on really bummerist kinds of things. I'm just not doing it, right? I have only so many minutes in the day, and wait a second, what am I thinking about again? Let me drop this. I'm on the wrong track. I'm projecting something negative into the future and getting beat up about it. That's really not smart. So why don't I return to the breath instead? Take a deep breath. See, a much more wholesome thought than some doomerist fantasy. That isn't inevitable. It isn't. And even if, who cares what happens in 100 years? Really, can you predict it? I think the people from 1924 would just be flabbergasted how things went as wrong as they have. I just floored, shocked. But in the next 100 years, well, guess what? Maybe everything will have changed for the better. And they'll look back at this time and think, what an anomaly. What a gigantic mistake. Something like that. But again, we're thinking in terms of people looking at human advancement and making judgments and why. Will they not have the same personality traits that afflict humanity at this time? Will they not be as distributed, or will there be more or less of it? How many malignant narcissists will be calling the shots in 100 years? Or will they be done away with as a political phenomenon? Who knows? The future is wide open. So why don't we imagine a better one instead? One filled with wholesome things, wholesome people, wholesome times, wholesome activities, wholesome philosophies, and just like that. If not for the majority of humanity, which is certainly, it seems, doomed to destruction, then certainly the better parts of it, they may have somehow shielded themselves from all of the industrial scale and industrial grade toxicity that gets splattered all over the place in these so-called unmodern times. But again, thinking about it, thinking about people, thinking about the annoyance of that, not very helpful. Not very enlightened, and probably not very true. How about people using it for good and missing as much as they can all of the sadism and vandalism and homicidal jealousies and envies and ill-willing and all of that. Because of course that is out there. Like there's certainly some garbage pails full of that if you want to go sifting through it. But maybe the stink, it will be enough to keep you away from a very far distance. So if you're walking around the bend of a road and the stench hits you, you might want to just keep on walking and don't go in the direction of the stench. Use it as a directional indicator of where not to go. Don't walk into the bog of stench. Was it the bog of infinite stench? Something like that. You may have to hop on some rocks to get through some different parts of it, but don't go for a bath in it. And hold your nose where appropriate. You can get through it, most likely. But yeah, those subconscious processes, don't overlook those. And don't consign yourself to ones that are negative or bad. Just sit down, do the sitting practice. Like just 5 minutes. Say, I'm going to sit down for 5 minutes, or make it 10. Like 10-minute, I'm just going to sit. I'm not going to do nothing. I'm going to look straight through my mind. And what is it here that is causing all of this agita? But maybe not focusing on it at first, because you might increase the flames. See, if you're looking for the problem and that's your practice, then it's going to be a problem-looking practice. You might want to just use a relief practice, like, well, something's bothering me. I don't know what it is. I actually don't want to know, but first I'm going to bring myself to a state of neutrality. I'm just going to clear my mind. Something's wrong. I don't know. I'm going to hit the reboot button. I don't want to know what it is, but maybe during that reboot, you'll see like a flash of a blue screen that will give you an indication of what process it was that is on the blink. And because you're in the practice of looking at these things more insightfully than a normal person would, then that might be the little flash of insight that you needed during the debugging process. And then you might say, well, okay, this thing reminded me of that time or that person that made me so angry that I'm still angry to this day, and that's why that person got knocked out. Something like that. Although I don't recommend ever doing that, but some people, they're that far gone that they don't realize that they're applying their anger to the wrong things. It's a false positive. You're feeling angry based on those subconscious processes that you're not addressing. So just sitting down for 5-10 minutes and clearing your mind totally and doing it at different times during the day or whenever you find time to do it, that's a way of getting through some difficult periods like that you really are dependent on you to clean up and clean out, and you will have the benefits from putting in that work. That's the main way of looking at it. You will change your destiny because those 3 fights that are waiting for you in your ignorant, unbettered self that wouldn't have taken the chance to course correct, that 3rd fight is fatal. That's the fight where the side of your face gets crushed and you fall off a building or something like that. But because you're taking the time to do this practice, you've changed your destiny. Because you just were able to pull yourself a couple degrees, and guess what? Those 3 fights didn't happen. The first one didn't, that led to the second one, that led to the third one. All that doesn't happen. Instead, no punches are thrown, no punches are taken. It's the better path. No worrying about the punches thrown or punches taken. No hurting from the punches thrown and punches faced. Some people think, yeah, what would you rather be punched or punch? And everyone says, I'd rather punch. But they don't realize when you punch, the hand is a very delicate instrument. A lot of bones. Look at your hand, move it around. It's very delicate. And you hit somebody's skull the wrong way, it's like hitting a stone. A lot of people break their hands. Breaking your hand, it's very bad. You use your hands essentially for everything. How am I going to play a piano if both my hands are broken? So every time you'll pick up an object, you can't close it or something like that because you knocked out 10 guys. Well, what does that help you when you'd rather have 10 fingers that work without being in pain? So, but guess what? Let's see, bad things have causality that are bad. Whereas the results of doing things the right way, the good way, they're good. Look at my hands, I can play a piano, and I'm 65 years old. 75, 85, whatever it is. I lived a more skillful life than the life of someone that was confronting things in an unskillful way. And so you do have the benefit of that. It's a real benefit. It's a benefit that a lot of people underestimate, especially when they're caught up in their emotions and caught up in their subconscious processes that they're not really taking the time to dismantle piece by piece, minute by minute, day by day. I keep coming back to this form of Protestantism that I was exposed to. That's sort of the underlying belief that anyone can just pick up a Bible and read it casually and be a good person, something like that. I think that's a very superficial way of going about something like that. I think the practice needs to be a little bit more than that. In fact, also getting somewhat away from the bookishness of it. Like you're in a reading club and then you just read some verses and that's enough. That's really not enough. That's not really treating it with the gravitas that essentially the highest practices are. So it really is how high is your practice? How authentic, how real? How real have you made your practice? How strong a force for good is your prayerful meditation, your meditative prayerful practice? How engaged are you with it on a real level? By engaging in walking meditation, walking prayerful meditation, or sitting prayerful meditation, or lying prayerful meditation. Or even free body weight meditations. You want to do and mix it up like that. Do 10 minutes of this, 10 minutes of that, and rotate like that. What works best for you at a certain time. If at this time your leg happens to be broken, maybe walking practice is not as advisable as lying practice. But if everything's working and you've been doing walking practice all day, 8 hours straight, maybe lying practice is more recommended if we are going to stay to the middle path of practice and not veer off into the austerities and make that some type of competitive game. The more austere the practice, the better it is. Well, no, actually that's not true. If it veers into becoming counterproductive, you're hurting yourself just in a different way, well, it's the same thing, dummy, as too little practice. I'm just going to walk through my house real fast all day with my eyes closed. Everything's going to be fine. I don't want to think about anything. Yeah, well, you know what? It's better to keep the eyes open and then to skillfully traverse where you are. Taking note what's there, what's in the way and what isn't. What appeared to be in the way, but oh look, there's a little path. I'll take that instead through this part, and then okay, let me take the time to clear this room out, clean it up, reorganize it. But do it in a zazen kind of way, like looking at it as a reestablishment of a new order. A reacquaintance with the discarded things, a reacquaintance with the principle of change. This was a fresh apple and now it's rotten. And not it gaining any insight from it, or being rushed, or just throwing things here and there without any thought to the greater significance that they represent. That's just crazy. You had a perfect apple and now look at it. It's completely changed within a matter of days. It's something that went from highly desirable to grotesque. And then you discover that principle, and that principle is everywhere. People have it. This person looked great. Now they don't look so great. These people felt great, and now they don't feel so great. Or vice versa. They went from the rotten apple to a ripe one again on the basis of their practice, because the practice is not stuck on predeterminate physical variables or physicalities. We can just think it that way. Why am I focusing on the rottenness of rotten apples when I can be focusing on the ripeness of apples instead? Or into the tree of the apple, the blossoms of the apple. Sitting under the apple tree in blossom. As far as a few suggestions regarding the return of a democracy from an illiberal democracy, I would say you do need to realize that elected officials are very important, and accountability is very important, and ethics are very important. And I think there should be a couple of qualifiers. Like maybe there can be a third party organization that can qualify candidates based on different criteria. For example, they get background checks, and then they also sign off on a statement of civic ethics, like that they will not work with third parties, foreign or domestic. They will not work with criminal or illicit intent. They will not, and just have them. It needs to be that simple, 5-10 statements, and they sign off on it, and the date is given, and they're going to be held up to those standards. Like, how about a statement? I understand that I'm taking this position to represent the people that I'm representing, and not to earn money on the side by using my position or using my influence, right? They need to sign off on that, and then people need to track them on that. And if they are busted after they sign off on that, that's it. Their whole career is over. So the next election, you need to have a different, maybe 2 or 3 different candidates. And how does the public know that? Well, the public is keeping an eye on them, and they're also exchanging information. And for example, it comes out, then already the public knows what they have to do. So where are the new candidates? And then also keeping an eye on the people, like what are they doing now, or what have they done since the beginning of their term, because all of that might have to be reversed, because you're dealing essentially with a criminal element. So that's like, yeah, we found out somebody is a criminal but was working at the bank, and then you have to do an investigation if there's something missing, or exactly what they did. You need to know everything they did. Did they appoint this person to this place? Did they set up this type of legislation? What did they vote for? What did they vote against? And you're gonna probably have to do some reverse engineering in that case. You can't expect them not to have done damage in other areas. Did they send information to hostile third parties? There might be some lawsuits or investigations that are required if something like that happens. So, and yeah, the voting systems, They really do need to be checked. And unfortunately, the left, which is essentially a terrorist organization, they're big into fake elections. So they have like a whole long tradition of that. And a lot of them might be established in your area. So those people that were saying that they were monitoring elections for, parties like an incumbency of corrupt politicians going back in many cases decades, you don't need any of them there. So if they're coming with a track record and the place is wrecked, then you really don't need to know anything more than that. They're not credible. The results weren't credible. So that's just sort of how it works. You need some fresh faces and people that understand how important that is. And also the consequences of trying to fudge numbers, for example, for the wrong candidates. That's a big no-no and shouldn't be considered some some trivial thing. It's a serious, 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 serious crime. If we just look at how bad things get when criminals get into political office, I mean, your country is more or less done at that point. Arbitrary arrests, arbitrary enforcement of the law, you name it, it's not a good place. So the little helpers, right, for that process happening should not be considered white collar criminals or anything else. These are essentially terroristic elements. And so keeping an eye on that whole thing is really important, and streamlining the process that makes it easy, right? Oversight easy. And it has to be airtight. You can't have one step in the process that is vulnerable to these interests. So, and that's another thing, just rigging, people trying to influence the election, any of them, any part of that, like not just the people monitoring the votes, right? All of them need to be taken into a serious consideration. And messing up on that level, like I said, it's not trivial. It shouldn't be considered trivial at all. It's a very, very, very serious crime. And that's the problem. Like, they always are looking for dupes and patsies that they can put in a position to take a fall if something goes wrong. But that's probably not far enough. They need to be questioned. Who put them up to it? Now, as far as some of the lessons from the war in Ukraine, I have a correction to make. I was talking about the AR and the AK debate, and I said that they liked the AR-79. That was obviously wrong. It was the AK-74. That's what they like. And that thing's just a hammer. I mean, that thing, it just works. Okay, it's not super duper, but it does the trick. If you do want to have a rifle that is sort of one of those unfancy models that gets the job done. However, I do understand the US has a lot more ARs, there's a lot more spare parts and all of that. So all of these decisions that you make as far as what your firearms are up to you, up to your micro environment. You might have a parts depot in your area that is specifically designed for this type of system, and for that reason it makes more sense, right? It could be a price issue. It could be your local legislation. There could be different factors. However, I have heard that, for example, in Western Australia, where they have these political operatives coming out of the left, the Labour Party, working with foreign interests, let's say, they have these buyback programs. So they're trying to get legally registered people to give up their guns. Then it's only the criminals and the cops that might also have deals with criminals and also foreign interests. They got the guns and you got jack squat. So another consideration. I mean, before you didn't have to take into consideration that you would have treasonous governments and malign influence in the domestic sphere, but now you do. It's a mixed bag. So giving it up under those circumstances, I would say, is probably the wrong thing to do. You should probably be stocking up. they're saying they're saying, yeah, we want to get these off the streets, and yet there's really no problem except for the growing domestic crime rate. Isn't that sort of like a counterintuitively stupid policy for a government to make, unless you're dealing with an anarcho tyranny type situation where maybe the cops are in on it? Which brings me back to all these narco states, like Ecuador just blew up. Mexico's been in a bad way for many years now. So you got to think about how these guys are operating, like how they infiltrate their ways in. Like, for example, I heard that a lot of times the drug trade's just half their business, the other half is extortion. But why do they like extortion? Well, they get to know people, and then they know the people that they know, and then they can either kidnap those people or do whatever they want to do. They spread their influence that way. And these are people, they're rule breakers. So they will just murder you, entire families, whatever it is, they don't care. But usually it's higher level thieves paying destitute young men, either with drugs or money, to carry out all different types of violence for them. Sort of the disposable element. But the masterminds, these are people that are around. They should be identifiable. And from what I've heard in places like Ecuador that have decided that it's a problem, they go after them like terrorists, like people you don't negotiate with, like they're outside the law, so they're outside the law type thing. And that's the way they gotta be, because that's what they're dealing with. They're dealing with people that have no inhibitions, okay? About kidnapping, torturing, killing people. So, but again, sometimes they have their different schemes. How about they show up with a bag full of cash and say, here, we want to do some business with your business. So, but what they want is you to launder the money. But once they get in, then they get to know everything about you, and you're sort of the expendable part of that dynamic. Even if you saw the money in the beginning, it might not ended up to have been worth it in the end. So you really cannot give them any foot into your business, your community, anything. And if they're there, you need to interpret the signs correctly and overshoot a response that they're not expecting. Because what they're expecting is just a sort of normalcy bias. Because they're the ones that are willing to do first mover activities. And theirs goes all the way to the hell realms. They don't have any restraint. So once you're tipped off that that's what's happening, that's what you're dealing with, then you need to take it a lot more seriously. Because most people don't, then again, their influence spreads, and it's a bad influence. It's not a good influence. take over this, they take over that. This doesn't work, that doesn't work, right? So crimes go unsolved, yada, yada, yada. It is not good. Also, what people forget, these drugs, like when people get hooked on drugs, and getting hooked on cocaine, for example, is a very well known, terrible thing that requires like therapy and everything else. I heard a story the other day. Some lady in California, she was like a paralegal. She went out, I don't know, hit the disco on the weekend. Um, was introduced to drugs. She became an addict. She sold her house. She made 200K on this crazy housing market, which is another type of attack vector. But she cashed in 200,000. Within 2 years, it was all blown on drugs. And then, prostitution, no problem. Like, they do everything. They lose all of their morals, all of their standards, their work ethic, their autonomy, everything. They're basically zombies. So the people pushing that, and getting people addicted, and then all that money getting blown, and it is just terrible for the rest of your community. So that people make money off that, or think that that's cool, or that's the best way to get rich, they're wrong. Nobody should have anything to do with that. Now, I said before, for people struggling with chemical dependency, only use whatever you can grow yourself, right? That might be, now, of course, you should look into your local legislation, but for example, those people have been known to plant medicinal plants for their own use, and that's an old tradition, but don't overuse that. And certainly, as far as the precepts concerned, it's not one of the 5 precepts. So the ultimate goal should be to wean yourself off and to deal with whatever suffering you're dealing with in the spiritual way, which is the subconscious. And a lot of times addressing the subconscious and not caving, or not just treating the symptom of the suffering with chemicals. Now look, I know it's easy to say that, and I know a lot of people are struggling, and that's why I'm giving them sort of this way. And with alcohol, like I said, you're not going to be able to wean yourself off it maybe all at once, although some people do that and have good effects. Some people also die when they do that. But some people are in a position they don't have any other choice. It's either they're going to die from withdrawal or they're going to die from alcoholism. It's one or the other. Now, if God is on your side, guess what's going to happen? Yeah, you're going to make it. But if not, you're doomed. So that's another reason. Why not believe in God? People say, you have the choice, don't you? Well, why not believe in something that brings you a lot of power, a lot of goodness, a power for good? Why not believe in a power for good? Something that's above yourself, right? Something that if you can tap into can give you that more power to do the right thing. Power you didn't know you had, you might not have it because he gave it to you, because you believed in him, because you committed to a better way of doing things. Not just for yourself, although that's primarily the reason, that's the whole reason. But of course, once you adopt that viewpoint, then you're a positive force for all other people in the world that you interact with. Right? If you're not a thief, if you don't want what they have, you know they don't have to fear you, and so your whole interaction with other people is one of generosity or neutrality. But there's no real paranoia or fear or any other thing that shouldn't be there. That does not mean other people are good, but that doesn't really matter as far as you're concerned. You don't have to go along with bad things once you recognize it's not good for you. They might also be ignorant. They might think it's okay, but it's just not for you because you have higher standards. And that's okay too, unless they make it a problem. But usually people don't. You don't have to address them, have a frontal conflict with them. You can just realize for yourself this person is not very wise, and therefore it would be a better thing not to associate with them, at least at this stage in their development. And there's really no telling whether or not they're going to develop in a good way. In fact, it does look like they probably won't be doing that. So, but you can still well wish them. Why not? But you can also separate from them. But yeah, what does the new political candidates, what do they have to address? Well, they have to address institutional corruption, ideological corruption. They have to address information corruption. They have to address the voting corruption. They have to address the banking system's corruption, and their energy sector, the corruption of their energy sectors, and also the corruption of corporations and businesses via private equity, venture capital, and other actors that have taken all of these warlike measures against the citizenry. So that's a lot. I understand it's a lot to chew. But it's possible, right? It is possible. But that is what needs to be done. So as far as accountability goes, you need to make them accountable on the basis of those strategic objectives. And if they don't produce, if they just pay that lip service, if they're not determined to do it, then you need someone else in that position. Then you can criticize them publicly for that. Here's what they said they would do, here's what they tried to do. It wasn't very accomplished. Maybe they were just flubbing it. So let's get somebody else in there. So that's what you do perhaps like a year ahead of an election. You start looking for replacements. And that's how active you have to be. If you're not that active, then this is how the rot sets in, and the rot it can be terminal. And certainly living under those conditions are just hell. It's just hell on earth. You've got arbitrary enforcement of the law. You've got arbitrary power plays. You've got people essentially focused on power and control at all costs. So again, they don't care if your industry falls apart. They don't care if strategically you're doing the wrong things. It's all about they and them, as per the malignant narcissistic model. And it's either them or it's them in the form of the party, which is the leftist party, which is the revolutionary class of malignant narcissists. They wanted to use the working class movement as their footstools to power. But again, late theoreticians realized that the working class wasn't enough of a revolutionary class, so that's why they started going and developing these other tyrannically sadistic groups that have had their brains scrambled psychologically, and them being emotionalized and conditioned to be a revolutionary class for the usurpers of democratic infrastructure as their radical base of vandals and attackers. So that's what they're doing. That's what they've done. That's their whole shtick. So they're not good people. They're not legitimate. They weren't part of the labor movement. not a good part of it, and whether or not they're going to be the chieftains of radicalized mobs or not. Essentially, they're just going for a takeover. So it's a takeover strategy with ideological class characteristics, and the people they work with are now pretty identifiable. So are they equal? Should they be portrayed as legitimate? Well, no. So that's another thing. Your information class that's slicing and dicing information and feeding you half-true narratives or creating toxic frames that are abstract and obtuse and bizarre and divisive, polarizing. Well, that's not acceptable, is it? So I would say you can identify them. You can put their profile and then just say, okay, on these dates, these are the movements, these are the NGOs they're affiliated with. This is what they've said that prove that they're essentially a leftist agent. And then they just come on that type of descriptor list. Whereas other people that aren't like that would get a different type of rating. Like, this person is, in fact, we believe, an independent, not just someone pretending to be that. That's at least what they're professing. Whether or not it's true, they're probably worth a shot, but it still requires close monitoring. And yeah, that's just the way it has to go. That's a way of reverse engineering these assaults on democracy and Western civilization. But there are different components. Some of them are criminal. Some of them have to do with the administrative blobs and their front men and the people backing them. So it's a little bit more complex than it looks like on the surface, but not so complex that there's not a way to reverse engineer it. And that's certainly what should be done.